mean, even at the early stage, my brothers could be altar boys. There was no such thing as an altar girl. I had to wear this horrible scarf in church. You knew as a girl that you were less open to opportunities than a boy from the beginning. And I was very keen to make it the way my parents wanted, but it wasn't so. And that was the justice issue.
That was the voice of Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland and United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. I'm Martin Nutty, and you're listening to the Irish Stew podcast. I'll be talking with Mary Robinson about Mrs. Robinson, the documentary featuring her life. I'm also delighted to have first-time director Eva Birthistle joining John and I for a conversation about her film, Kathleen Is Here. Eva has an impressive list of acting credits on both the large and small screen, including the recent hit TV series Bad Sisters. Both women's films will be featured at the Solas Nua 19th Capital Irish Film Festival, taking place in Silver Spring, Washington, D.C. So to kick this off, we're joined by Maedhbh Mc Cullagh, director of the film festival, to talk about these films and the excellent lineup of other Irish films which will play out over a packed 4 days from February 27th to March 2nd. And with all that, welcome Maedhbh Mc Cullagh to Irish Stew.
Hi Martin, it's lovely to be here today. Thanks so much for having us on. Delighted to talk about the Capital Irish Film Festival and Solas Nua.
Maedhbh, as I understand it, this is your third year as director of the Capital Irish Film Festival. I'm curious, having completed 2 festivals, what are some of your learnings from that experience?
Wow, that's a great question. What have I learned? Well, first of all, there is a fantastic audience in DC, very discerning, very cultured, who love Irish film. Many of them are Irish, but many of them are not, and they just are really interested in Irish storytelling. Very loyal audience, very committed, and people love to engage and talk about film, especially after they've seen it. I suppose one of the challenges of running a film festival like this is we are a very small but tight team of people. So you are maximizing your resources and you have to be nimble and you are wearing many, many hats. You know, you could be programming one day, you could be meeting with diplomats another day, you could be introducing somebody very, very important, speaking to a room full of 400 people, and another day you could be booking flights and working out the accommodation.
So speaking of diplomats and other luminary types, this year, as I alluded at the top of the podcast, you're going to have Mary Robinson in attendance. Talk to us about the impact that'll have on this year's Capital Irish Film Festival.
Oh, it's an absolute dream come true for me. I have a very clear memory of being a schoolgirl in County Cavan in Ireland, and Mary Robinson, I think she was on her campaign trail, coming into an office I was in Cavan Town, and I just remember the energy shifting in the room when she came in. It was this literal presence coming into a room, and I remember shaking her hand, and then she became the first woman president of Ireland, and she really changed the trajectory of my life and the life of many women in Ireland at that time. So it's an extraordinary feat for us to have Mary coming to the screening and to stay with us afterwards. She's going to be in conversation with author Katrina Palmer, and we're very privileged. We have Ambassador Byrne Nason, who's been incredibly supportive, as have the team at Embassy of Ireland, to make all of this happen. And obviously we have to thank Aoife Kelleher and Cormac Hargaden from Loose Horse for making this incredible film. It covers Mary's life. It's the first time anyone has ever done a documentary on her life, and it really tracks all of the extraordinary shifts that have taken place politically and socially in Ireland, but also her personal shifts across her life. And it's just an amazing moment to have Mary come to Washington, D.C., particularly at this time that we are living through in America, as our first woman president, as the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the first special envoy on climate change for the United Nations. And also I'm very excited because she's going to talk not only about the film and about her past work, but the work that she's currently doing, which is extraordinary, with a company called Project Dandelion, which is an amazing initiative for climate change and to get young women and women of all ages involved in climate change activism. So yeah, I'm incredibly excited and really, really honoured. And yeah, it's a dream.
I'm really looking forward to seeing Mrs. Robinson on the big screen. And on this episode, we're also talking to Eva Birthistle. For American listeners, they may very well know her as one of the Bad Sisters. That's the show that is on Apple TV, which I just watched a month ago. And it was quite interesting to sit down and talk to her about her film. But can you give our listeners a thumbnail sketch of what to expect from that film?
Yeah, Kathleen Is Here is an exceptional film. I saw it at the Galway Fleadh last year, as I saw many of the films that are being programmed for the festival. I go there every summer to see what's happening, especially in Irish film. And this film was extraordinary. It blew me away. And it is her first feature debut, and it's exceptional. It's very emotional. It's really tense, a psychological thriller about a young girl called Kathleen who is 18 years of age and is aging out of the foster system in Ireland. And what's really remarkable about it is part of the research, Eva actually met with young people who have gone through this experience. And it's definitely harrowing at times. And the film is led by amazing Irish talent, Hazel Dupe, who really is extraordinary in the role. And I'm so excited to share it. Again, it's a woman-centred story, and we're very committed at the festival to representing Irish women's stories on screen. So for me to be able to close the festival with Kathleen Is Here, and for Eva and Hazel to come to DC to present the film, to talk about it and meet with our audiences is an extraordinary privilege. We're absolutely delighted.
So the festival is going to run for 4 days from February 27th to March 2nd. I understand the tickets are hot and in demand right now. There's something like 39 films and 19 screenings. So question, are there still tickets available? And if so, how do people go about reserving seats?
So yes, we made our full programme announcement last Friday, and we've already sold out of our opening night event, the Mrs. Robinson film, and we've sold out of all of our festival passes. But you can buy individual tickets to any of the screening events taking place across the festival at afi.com or at solasnua.org. There is a waiting list in place for opening night, and as always happens, some people don't turn up who've bought tickets. So you can always try that. But what I would really recommend people doing is exploring the rest of the programme. We have a phenomenal lineup of features and shorts across the full 4 days of the festival. And I can recommend there will be something for everybody in the programme.
And what's the website that people should go to get more information?
Yes, solasnua.org is our website. That's solasnua.org/CIF. That's CIFF. And this festival is presented by Solasnua. And for those of you that don't know, Solasnua is the presenter of Contemporary Irish Arts in DC. And we are in our 20th anniversary this year. So it's also a celebration of the work of Solasnua. And this is our 19th festival programme this year.
So Maeve, while I have you here, can you give us a rundown on some of the other films that are going to be featured in the Capital Irish Film Festival?
There's a phenomenal amount of film coming out of Ireland, and the real challenge is what you have to leave out. We could have done 40 screenings with the amount of films that are coming out. It's just really hard to make those decisions because you do want to include more filmmakers. But what I would say, to definitely take a look at the programme and explore it. There are many different types of films, many different themes this year. But what I would say, one of the features of our festival is that we bring a lot of the Irish filmmakers over to DC. So, for example, obviously Mary Robinson will be coming with Mrs. Robinson. We will have the director Ross Colleen coming over for the most beautiful film, a documentary called Don't Forget to Remember. And it's about the experience of asbestos who is a very famous Irish visual street artist. And the film is about the loss that he experienced as his mother developed Alzheimer's disease. And it documents this most beautiful art project that he created as a result of it, that he then shared with the community in Dublin. We'll also have director Kathleen Harris coming over with her film Birdsong, which is the most beautiful documentary on Sean Renan, who's this ornithologist from County Cork, who's been recording every species of birdsong in Ireland, and it's absolutely beautiful. We have a really important film taking place on Saturday afternoon called The Irish Question, and it features director Alan Gilsonan and writer and journalist John Walsh. And they've made a film about the questions surrounding the future of Northern Ireland. Everybody keeps talking about a poll on the border in Northern Ireland, and they've created this film because they really want people to start having conversations about what that looks like. And I suppose they're trying to look to Brexit and to learn lessons from the way many people sleepwalked into something that they weren't fully aware of. So it's really wonderful. There are incredible voices from all across the communities in Northern Ireland and in the Republic. And it's really spurring a conversation about what people want for the future. So that's going to take place on Saturday afternoon on March 1st. We have David Keenan, this amazing singer-songwriter, coming over with director Paddy Hayes for a beautiful documentary called David Keenan, Fucla ar Canvas. Words on Canvas, and that's one of 5 Irish language films that we're featuring this year at the festival. We also have Paul Kennedy. Many people will know Paul Kennedy from The House of the Dragon, which was a spin-off from Game of Thrones. And Paul has written and directed a wonderful film called Dead Man's Money, which stars Judith Roddy and Kieran McMenamin. And Kieran McMenamin will be with us in DC as well as Paul. And then there's an amazing Irish horror film, psychological thriller called Frewaka, that's been directed by Aislinn Clark, and it has been trailblazing for the last year at different cultural festivals. Aislinn is coming and going to do Q&A with us on Saturday the 1st as well. A film called Fiddlegurm, or Blue Fiddle, and it's Anne McCabe's feature. It's in Irish, and it's starring a brand new actor called Edith Lawler, 13-year-old multi-All-Ireland fiddle champion at all the Flas, and she's coming, and I'll be introducing her, and we'll have a little live music with Edith. And then obviously we're going to have Eva Birthistle and Hazel with us as well. We're also really excited that we have multiple East Coast premieres, 2 North American premieres. We're also really excited because we are screening Sinead O'Shea's Blue Road, the Edna O'Brien story. And it's a phenomenal documentary. She had access to Edna O'Brien in the last few years of her life, as well as access to all of her diaries. And it's a beautiful tribute to her, and it features a lot of interviews with Edna before she passed. And then also we have 3 phenomenal shorts programs, and there are a lot of different films in these programs. I think altogether we have 23 shorts. There's lots to see, lots of documentaries, lots of features. There is definitely something for everyone, and we hope your listeners will join us in DC. The festival starts on February 27th and runs through March 2nd.
Before moving on to our next segment featuring Eva Birthistle, I just want to say thanks, Maedhbh, for coming on and giving us a rundown on the festival. This is the 2nd year we've done this kind of an episode, and I'm looking forward to repeating it again next year. So thank you. And now on to Eva Birthistle, director of Kathleen Is Here. Eva Birthistle, welcome to Irish Stew.
Thank you so much. Very happy to be here.
So I'm going to start off here, Eva. On Irish Stew, we're very interested in origin stories and how people see their Irishness. And I see from your bio that you grew up in Bray and Wicklow. You moved as a teenager to Derry, and then you moved back to Dublin to be trained at the Gaiety acting school. And then at some point in time, you made the jump over to London. So, question, are you a Bray girl, a Derry girl, a London girl, a Dublin girl? Where exactly do you fit?
I don't feel like I fit in anywhere in particular. It's the thing that I've, in some ways, sort of battled with over the years. I didn't quite know where I belonged because I left Bray at 14 and I was in Derry for those very formative years as a teenager. Then I feel more connected to Dublin because I sort of spent a lot of time there and moved back there. But then I've been in London for 24 years. I mean, I feel through and through Irish, obviously, but I always feel quite sort of torn about and pulled as to where my heart really lies. So I think I'm going to randomly throw in West Cork just because I feel like I have a social affinity with West Cork, and my grandfather was from Cork, but my parents are still up in Derry. If I'm going back to Ireland, I generally go to Dublin. So if you really push me into a corner about it, I'd say that I'm a Dublin girl, I suppose.
So can I ask you about Derry? Because it just jumped out at me. You moved to Derry in the late 80s, where everybody else was leaving Northern Ireland. You went there. Now, as I understand it, your dad got a job up there.
That's right.
But talk to me about that time there and that experience, because I imagine as a teenager that had to be really freaking tough. And going into that situation can't have been easy either, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we were supposed to be moving to Cork. That's probably where the grow for Cork first came, because that was the plan. My dad got the job down there and we picked out the school and the house, and that's where the site was set. And then very last minute, it was like, actually, folks, we're going to Derry. And it was a bit of a shocker then, because like you say, it was late 80s. It was still in the middle of a war, really, essentially. And that's all I knew of the North. I was 14. I'd never been up to the North before. I literally, like, all I saw on TV was a man with a beard whose voice was dubbed over. That's the biggest sort of insight I had into it, which is nothing at all. So when I moved up, it was a real eye-opener. My brother was there as well, and it was like nothing else. It was like nothing else. It was, I think when you're 14, when I was living in Bray, it was about who you fancied and what trainers you were wearing. And when I moved to Derry, it was were you Catholic or Protestant? That was the first question that anybody wanted to know. And that sense of identity and who you were and where you came from was just something I'd never really thought about before, just taking it for granted. I just grew up in a seaside town. I found that really hard to comprehend initially. And then it was just about groups, what group you fitted into. But that was first and foremost, was it the Catholic group or the Protestant group? And then after that, it was music. Derry was and still is, has a very strong music at its core. And it was what band you followed. And they sort of had all these subsets depending on what music you followed. So it was all about sort of your tribe and where you belonged. Probably same for most teenagers. But what was at the forefront of all that was what religion you were. And it was hard being a Catholic in Derry in a predominantly Protestant school in the late 80s. It was a tough experience initially, but because of the schooling choice, I got to get sort of introduced and experience friends and communities from both sides of the divide, if you like. And I think that probably wouldn't have happened had I gone to a Catholic school. So I was very grateful for that in the end. It took a while for me to fully understand the value of that. And like I say, my parents still live in the North. I go back at least once a year, and generally we congregate in Dublin, but I go to Derry about once a year. And I have a funny, I think, sort of relationship with it, because it feels like it's part of who I am. It's part of my makeup. But it was essentially, I was only there for 6-7 years, which really isn't very long, but it was one of the most impactful times of my life. That's a very long answer to your question.
No, Eva, did something, I was reading about your move to Derry. It's only 165 miles from Bray, but it sounds a world apart. And it sounds like you had that sort of outsider experience, outsider looking in. And that's a very strong feeling in Kathleen Is Here, that sort of perspective of not quite fitting, not belonging. Did something of that experience carry into the story that you crafted for Kathleen Is Here?
100% it did. It actually, though, for some reason, I don't know why, I had sort of, buried it somewhere. Didn't realize until quite recently. I think we were cutting the film, but we'd certainly shot the film. And I realized actually that sort of interest and connection to the outsider and the person on the periphery was absolutely about, came from my experiences and my childhood and adolescence. It's that funny thing when you're writing, though. I think you think you're writing about something else, and then it's not until So when you're deep into the process, or even after it, or even you've made it, it's come out, that you start to pick apart, oh, that's what that's about. And there's obviously the whole motherhood and relationships with one's mother, and the need and want for a mother figure is very prevalent in the film. But that was also when I first started writing the script, like 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I was pregnant, and there was all my fears about motherhood coming out of place as well. But again, it took a long time for me to fully realize that. So I think just that's the interesting process of writing. It's coming from the depths of somewhere, and a lot of the time you're not fully understanding why or what.
When I was thinking of this, I saw a quote from David Lynch recently, and I'll probably mangle it, but it was something along the lines of, you don't create an idea, you catch it. It's something that's out there, and it sounds like this idea caught you, wouldn't let you go. You had an earlier iteration of the film, Kathleen Was Here, a short, and reading a little bit about your process, it sounds like you had the germ of the idea, and it was like a magnet. And as you're passing through life, you're seeing other things, and they start working their way into your story.
Yeah, I think that's right, because like it was, like I say, a long time ago when I first started writing the feature. So I wrote the feature and had that finished before the short happened. The short was just as a sort of a tool to get the feature green lit. But it morphed, and I think probably, like you say, sort of honed, but you also grab things from various parts of your psyche or your past, and it all informs what you're creating. But it started off as quite a different story. It wasn't about a young woman coming out of foster care, but thematically it was very, very similar. Still about dealing with grief, looking very much focusing in on the mother-daughter relationship. So all those themes were there from the very beginning, but it really changed, umpteen drafts later, that it became about Kathleen, about this girl. And I happened upon a vlog of a girl who was in the States who's going through foster care, and was really taken by her story and her experiences, and how she was putting them out to the world in this sort of video diary form, and her need to do that. And that was really what sparked the idea for the character of Kathleen, and the whole care story as well came from seeing her vlog. It's all connected, isn't it? All these experiences and themes are all connected. So
congratulations are in order, because Kathleen Is Here was the recipient of 7 IFTA nominations: Best Director, Best Picture, Best Screenplay, and you've obviously got your hands deep in all of those things. And along with the principal actors, Hazel Dupe, Best Actor, and she's just on the camera like for 95% of the film, so that's pretty tough to carry that. But you've had a long and extended career on both TV and film. Now you're behind the camera. What surprised you?
what surprised me, I tell you what surprised me. Well, lots of things. There were daily surprises. What surprised me was the thing that I was most scared about wasn't actually a problem. So my biggest fear before I started filming was that I would be on set and somebody would ask me something and I wouldn't know how to answer. I wouldn't know what to do. That was my biggest fear. And
imposter syndrome.
Yes,
right?
exactly. And I certainly had that day one. I had full-on imposter syndrome. It was a scary day, but it dissipated very quickly. And what I learned about myself was that I love it. I love a problem. I love it. I love to be challenged by a problem, and I love to solve. And I think I hadn't factored that into the work. Of course, you do your prep and you're constantly figuring things out. But it was just a joy to realize that my biggest fear was actually one of my strengths. That was just something I learned when I was doing it, just by the act of doing. And I think it took me by surprise, because in my day-to-day, not on set, at home or with the kids or the regular day-to-dayness, I'm quite a procrastinator and I'm terrible at making decisions, and obviously you can't be like that when you're making your film. So I was just so relieved to realize that actually that's something that I felt that I could do, that the problem wasn't a problem. So it's a funny answer to your question, because there are lots of other challenges, but I think that was the one that I was most concerned about, and it was okay.
Eva, let me ask you a little bit about the mood of the film, the kind of tone poem sense I got from it, the color palette, the atmosphere you create. I just had this thought back in the day, to date myself, when I used to shoot photography on film to shoot film photos in using Ektachrome. And it had this sort of some like Ektachrome feel to me, the color palette and the atmosphere. Can you talk about arriving at that?
Yeah, that's lovely. My DP, Bertie, who's wonderful, was so involved in all those decision makings. Obviously, I had created a whole mood board of what I had envisaged and what I wanted, but he brought so much to that as well. I collated all these images from lots of other movies, and so we knew what our jumping off point was. But what was really important for me for the film was to differentiate between the different worlds, Kathleen's different worlds. So the world of her inside the home, her mother's home, in contrast to Dee's, in contrast to when she's out at the supermarket. We wanted to really differentiate between all those. So the color palette really shifts between those sort of three main places, especially between Dee's house and Kathleen's house. Dee's house is warm and it's got sort of yellows and goldens and oranges and much sort of warmer feel to it, whereas Kathleen's house obviously has that very just strip lighting, muted but cold dampness to it. We were incredibly fortunate with our location as well for Kathleen's house, because I stumbled across that house whilst on a very early recce with my mother. I have to give her credit for being my first recce person, and we drove past it and I was saying I wanted to find somewhere that with a house in amongst other nice houses, but this house was different and it was broken down, but it was surrounded by nice houses. It was, so that might be tricky to find in such close proximity, because I sort of wanted them almost next door to each other. And we drove past this little close, and there it was. I sort of sneakily took some photos, and then the actual location manager about a year later went and knocked on the door, and the house was as you see it on film. Like we actually we thought we were going to have a bit of a job distressing everything. We didn't have to do. In fact, we had to kind of tidy it up a bit, because it was really that sort of broken down, but it had this incredible atmosphere that I think just jumps off the screen when you see it. And I sort of always felt like the house is sort of like a character itself. Memories of Kathleen's mum was there, and the room that she doesn't go into until the sort of towards the end of the film. But it needed to have this atmosphere about it that was in real stark contrast to Dee's house. So we spent all that sort of choosing that tone and the grade as well, of course. It was all very, very considered.
It was like down a cul-de-sac, right? It was like sort of at the end of the world there. And
yeah, exactly. And sort of had, so just stood alone. Like the other houses were all closer to each other or else semi-detached. So this just was stood alone on its own plot. You just felt it was like Kathleen, this sort of broken and isolated. I thought it was very, very apt.
I'm wary of categorizing films. It sounds so Hollywood. This is a psychological thriller, meets social realism, and blah, blah, blah. I think, in my view, it firmly fits into a social realism tradition. And in talking with John off camera, or off podcast, I should say, I kind of suggested that this is a film that will not be pushed out by the Chamber of Commerce as this is Ireland and all its beauty. Now, there is beauty in the film itself, but there is a kind of a gritty reality. So talk to me about making the film in Ireland. Does it have to be in Ireland? And is this a film where you think it's filling in something missing in the, if you will, the Irish film canon itself?
I've always felt the story was global, that it's teen coming out of care, a broken system, which unfortunately that is a global problem. In that very strange intermediate period where she's aging out of care but hasn't yet properly landed in the world, or she has, but in that very unsupported way, which I think is one of the biggest problems with aging out. So it felt like that could be anywhere, that could be absolutely anywhere. And of course it's an Irish film and it feels very Irish in many ways, but I never refer to it. I don't really know where they are for starters. It's a fictional town, Kilcameron. They refer to the city, which could be Dublin, it could be Galway, it could be Cork. I wanted to keep it very, ambiguous, because again, I just wanted to feel like that is a situation that you could plonk in any country, anywhere, and it would probably really be the same issues would be there, the same problems would be there. I think there's Irish films, I guess, that are sort of social realism. I wanted to make it slightly different. I wasn't trying to sort of emulate somebody like, I mean, Ken Loach is a great person to use as an example, because he does it so brilliantly and so flawlessly. And I didn't want to even try and do that, but I did want to obviously try and be sensitive and truthful to the story of somebody who is coming out of care and what that must be like. So I worked closely with the group in Derry who do exactly that. They support young adults coming out of care and make sure that the story felt like a very authentic story. But I purposely wanted to push it into the well, not even psychological, but into thriller territory. And you're right, it's a difficult one to put in a box because it does a bit of both. That was very intentional. And I did that for a couple of reasons. And the main one was that I felt like, whilst remaining authentic to the story, it was an interesting and workable way of looking at that kind of a situation in the extreme, that it could handle it being sort of heightened, that it was, the story gets pushed to the extreme, but it didn't feel like that was impossible. There's far worse stories of people coming out of care and what happens in their lives. But I felt looking at it through that genre of it being thriller, it just heightens everything, firstly. But then I think the hope was that an audience would look at it and understand better as to what can happen to a person if they are left to their own devices, having been through such a dreadful upbringing. That it has a thriller feel to it, but that's not, the
tension. There's just an air of tension. What's coming next? You knew something was coming.
Yeah, but then it feels plausible, I suppose.
Yeah. Yes. And growing.
Yeah. Exactly.
Anxiety.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I also thought, well, it would be more commercial, to be totally honest as well, because it's hard to get people to go and watch a social realism film, a large audience to go and see that. It tends that there's an audience for it, of course there's, and I'm one of them. Those films are wonderful and have such a place in the world, and are necessary to give a voice to those who don't generally have one. But they also can be limiting. I think people find them difficult and want that, not entertaining enough. So I thought it would have a wider reach if I pushed it into the thriller territory, because that genre just has a wider reach. It's just a fact. So I felt the story could handle it, whilst also serving the character and all that, but hopefully also just attracting a bit more of a varied, diverse audience.
I found it refreshing to see a film from Ireland. I'm going to say this, I know I'm going to mangle this, but it didn't reek of Irishness. It was a contemporary film. I could easily see the same film happening at the Jersey Shore,
right?
A place like that. It's the universal themes. And really, I'm aware that I'm not in America as I'm watching this film, but it wasn't until there's a scene in a pub and there's just a little brief section of trad music that kind of like, oh yeah, we're in Ireland. Gotcha. So I think that's a positive in that American audiences maybe are looking for that little Irish whimsy or blarney, and it's refreshing to see blarney-free Irish filmmaking, and it's contemporary Ireland. It's not rustic rural Ireland. It's Ireland that people are living through, and they're living through the same things in many, many other parts of the world.
Yeah, I think that's right. And that's great that that's what you felt when you were watching it, because that was the hope. And it speaks to the housing crisis in Ireland and some current issues that are going on.
Can I ask, since you raised Ken Loach, whether he's actually seen the film? Just to let our listeners know, back in 2004, Eva acted in a wonderful film set in Scotland called A Fond Kiss, or maybe A Fond Kiss. I'm not sure exactly how the title is said. It's directed by Ken Loach, and for many American listeners, they're not familiar with his work, but he is the champion or the standard in social realism films. But that's a very long question. So did you have him look at it, and did you hear him?
He has it. He does have
Mhm.
it, and he hasn't watched it yet. He's waiting to get to hopefully get to see him on a bigger screen than just his laptop at home. So he's in all the right ways a purist. He hates to watch movies on a small screen, but he does have it, and he gave lovely advice after we had shot it. I think it was in that stage where you're about to play into the world. He's very, very supportive. So yes, eagerly and nervously awaiting feedback from him.
So you're coming over to the States. You're going to be at the film festival. You're going to be there. But on your way over on the plane, you're sitting next to somebody and you're having a conversation. You say what you're up to. Oh, what's your film about? The person next to you asks. So what's your quick capsule summary that will entice somebody to come see the film?
Okay, well, whether we'll entice them or not, I don't know. I would say it's about a young adult who ages out of foster care, moves back to her family home following the death of her biological mother, and obsesses over a woman across the road in order to obtain her as a mother figure.
Kathleen is here. Kathleen is coming here. We look forward to seeing the reaction when you debut the film in various spots of the U.S., including Washington, D.C.
Yes, great. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking about it again.
So make sure, all you listeners out there, if you're in the Washington, D.C. area, come down and watch a wonderful social realism psychological thriller. It's a great piece of work. And on behalf of myself and John, we'd like to thank Eva Birthistle for taking time out of her busy day. And we're looking forward to meeting you down in DC.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
A big thank you to Eva Birthistle for giving us an insight into her first-time experience as a director. It's a transition that is not always successful for gifted actors. I'm glad to report that was not the case for Eva. We hope you get the opportunity to watch Kathleen Is Here. We think it'll be time well spent. Next up is a conversation recorded with Mary Robinson, where we discuss the documentary Mrs. Robinson, which will also be shown at the upcoming Capital Irish Film Festival. Needless to say, we were delighted to host the former Irish president on the podcast. Mary Robinson is one of the globe's most recognizable Irish women. To use a tired phrase, she needs no introduction. Her life is the subject of the recently IFTA-nominated film, Mrs. Robinson. With that, Mary Robinson, welcome to Irish Stew Podcast.
Thank you.
I'm going to kick this off here. We love origin stories on Irish Stew, and early in the film you make reference to your grandfather who spoke to you as an adult when you were a child. He seems to have been a seminal figure in your life. Can you flesh out a little bit more about him and what he meant to you?
No, it's true. He was a lawyer who had to retire early because of ill health, but he had taken cases for the tenant against the landlord, and these were very, very difficult times in Ireland. And I loved the way he talked about justice. And the real thing was that he talked to me as an adult because he didn't know how to talk to a child. I mean, there was a great distance between grandparents and grandchildren in those days. And although I listened to him keenly, I would never have dreamt of contributing myself to the discussion. But now, if I have an intergenerational discussion with a 13, 14, or 15-year-old, they're quite happy to share their ideas. And I really welcome this. It's a complete difference. But all I did was listen. But he filled me with a passion for justice.
Would you attribute your pursuit of a career in the law to him specifically? I know both your parents were doctors, so obviously you made that shift.
Yes, I think he certainly had a big influence on that. My parents also influenced my sense of justice because they kept telling me, as the only girl among four brothers, that I had the same opportunities. And they would back me totally. Anything my brothers could do, but it wasn't true. I mean, even at the early stage, my brothers could be altar boys. There was no such thing as an altar girl. I had to wear this horrible scarf in church. And, you know, it just, you knew as a girl that you were less open to opportunities than a boy from the beginning. And I was very keen to make it the way my parents wanted, but it wasn't so. And that was the justice issue.
So I'm Delighted to see, actually, we're recording this on January 15th, and the film was nominated for an IFTA. And telling your story, I think, is a wonderful service to a new generation of young women. I will note that I have 9 nieces, 6 Irish and 3 American. I have no children of my own. And your life is iconic, certainly for them. But the film itself is going to be playing at the 19th Capital Irish Film Festival, which will be taking place from February 27th to March 2nd. I wonder if you could reflect on that timing, specifically given the shift of power in Washington, D.C., and the fact that the film itself is playing in that area.
It's very interesting because the film does show a lot of social progress, and in particular in relation to women's rights in Ireland. I had a part in it, but there were lots of others who were fighting for women's rights, and young people particularly engaged in the 2 referendums that we had, which are also featured briefly. And I think it just shows a country opening up and becoming more pluralist, becoming more diverse, becoming more tolerant, etc. Just at a time when there's great worry about the United States, particularly in certain states of the United States where women's rights are going backwards, but also where you have now a president back in office, very determined to implement a very right-wing agenda. So it will be interesting to see how the discussion goes. But I'm proud of how Ireland developed. And I have to say, it wasn't my idea to make the film. It was the idea of my great advisor and friend, Bride Rosney, who was my special advisor for the 7 years when I was president. And she was the one who said, you know, you've had a long life, people need inspiration. And she was right. And I'm very focused now on the film actually encouraging women in particular and young women in particular to become more engaged, more involved in issues, and in particular in the climate and nature crisis, because I have this women leaders network called Project Dandelion. We're trying to have a climate justice movement to really step up in the way that women do, which is more collaborative and problem solving.
I'm curious, when did climate is clearly now foremost in your mind? When did that first register with you? Obviously, you've had a long career in the law. You've had a long career in public service, the President of Ireland, running the Human Rights Commission for the United Nations. But at what phase in your career did that really begin to register with you?
I have to admit, quite late in my career, because during my 7 years as president from 1990 to 1997, I didn't make any speech about climate. I did speak about the environment because we did care. We didn't know really about the impacts of climate and the climate and nature crisis. Yes, some academics, some wise people who were more informed did, but they were a very small minority at that stage. And then when I became High Commissioner, I did become aware of the climate crisis, but another part of the UN was dealing with it. And I was in my large silo about human rights. But still, when you think about it, how I didn't make the connection when I was dealing with human rights, women's rights, the rights of indigenous peoples, the rights of people with disabilities. And yet I missed it. It was when I started a small foundation working on economic and social rights that in African countries that I was really surprised at the way women in particular would say to me, everything has changed. Is God punishing us? What is happening? This is outside our experience. And they were talking about the rainy seasons weren't coming when they should, or long periods of drought, followed by flash flooding that would destroy the school and the whole village, in fact. And they had no insurance. And it was often women who came together to try to build resilience.
I think that's interesting because anybody that pays attention to this issue recognizes that the burden of climate change often falls on countries who are not the origin so much of climate change. But now, as we're recording this, we're dealing with wall-to-wall stories of fires in LA. I wonder if you could reflect on what you think the impact of that is going to be. Are we ever going to get to a tipping point where countries in general will recognize that this can no longer be long-fingered?
You know, the sad thing is, the sooner we get to that tipping point that you described, the better, because I'm aware very acutely of the climate science. I have a new hat, which I didn't have when the film was being made. I'm now a guardian of the 9 planetary boundaries, which is the work of a great climate scientist and his institute, the Potsdam Institute in Germany. And it's broader than just climate. It shows all of the ways in which nature and what we've put up into the atmosphere are affecting the ecosystems that sustain us. And we're in breach of 6 of those 9 boundaries, but we retrieved one of them. So it's a story of hope, actually. The ozone layer, do you remember in the 80s, we thought we would fry because of these chemicals. We very quickly dealt with it. We got a Montreal Protocol, it's called, agreement that we would not use those chemicals. We actually do need to address this globally, collaboratively, locally. It's not just governments, it's all of society, because we're up against a huge threat to humanity. I would put it this way, and I'm not exaggerating. I think the next 5 years are going to be among the most important years in human history, because if we cannot bring ourselves into where we need to be in 2030 in order to be net zero by 2050, then for people alive today, particularly younger people, things are going to get so much worse in every country. They're already much worse in, as you said, in the developing countries, which are least responsible, and the small island states. Small island states are going under. They know it's an existential threat. What is happening in Los Angeles is terrible, but I hope people will learn the lesson. We cannot negotiate with climate and nature. We are damaging climate and nature, which is ourselves. We are nature, and we're damaging the ecosystems. So I do feel very, very passionately about this from all kinds of points of view, but particularly justice, the injustice of who's doing it. And it's really the big oil, fossil fuel companies that are insistent on continuing to make profits. And they have known since the 1970s, they've muddied the science, they've misrepresented, and now they have a government in the United States that seems to be part of this misrepresentation, which is very worrying indeed.
So finally, let me ask, and I think you made reference to this, optimism. You have grandchildren.
I do. We're lucky enough to have had 7, yes.
Yes, and I assume they're more than aware of the shift, let's say, towards hard right politics and of climate. How do you inculcate within them a sense of optimism?
I am aware that my older grandchildren, because the youngest is 4, my older grandchildren and young people of that kind of age, teenagers and post-teenagers, are beginning to suffer a lot of mental health problems because they see a world that is not moving in the right direction. And I think we need to regroup and work very hard to ensure that we will meet the carbon goals that we've set, but also restore nature, regenerate. And that's a very positive story in itself, because regeneration is very exciting to do. It's very exciting in farming, it's very exciting in cities to make them greener, make them cooler, etc. And Project Dandelion the dandelion is a nature symbol very deliberately to harness the energy and the firepower basically of women and their capacity for practical problem solving at local, but also at national and international level. And I'm aware of the need for hope. I learned a great lesson from Archbishop Tutu, who was the first chair of the elders that were brought together by Nelson and Mandela. And I was one of the founder elders, very privileged to be there and extraordinarily affected by his legacy. And Archbishop Tutu, when he was accused of being an optimist, said, "Oh no, I'm not an optimist. I'm a prisoner of hope." And that means you work on what you have. The glass may not be half full, it may be only a third full. You work with it, you collaborate, you make it bigger, you grow it. That's what hope is. It's action. Hope is action to address the problems we have and to make a difference.
And with that note of optimism, on behalf of myself and our Artist 2 podcast listeners, we would very much like to thank Mary Robinson for taking time out of her busy schedule. A total pleasure, and thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Hey, it's Martin. I hope you enjoyed this film-centric Women Strong episode. This is the second time we've had the pleasure of spreading the word on the Capital Irish Film Festival, which is in its 19th incarnation. information, and it's going from strength to strength. We'll be attending the event in person, which will be running from February 27th to March 2nd in Silver Spring, Washington, D.C. Make sure to check our show notes for all the details on the films and the festival. That leaves me with the opportunity to say thank you to guests Maedhbh Mc Cullagh, Eva Birthistle, and Mary Robinson for coming on Irish Stew and telling us something of their lives, the work they do, and their different Irish perspectives. I hope you enjoyed these conversations as much as I did. This is Martin Nutty. And on behalf of John Lee and myself, thank you for listening to the Irish Stew podcast. Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.